Mysterious drug-resistant germ, deemed an urgent threat, is quietly sweeping the whole Earth, Tyler Durden Zero Hedge reports. Thanks to the overprescription of antimicrobial drugs and the use of antifungicides in crop production, a relatively new germ that preys on people with weakened immune systems is rapidly spreading across the globe. This according to the New York Times. The infection is a fungus known as Candida auris and kills almost half of all patients who contract it within 90 days. 50%. Can you imagine? That's according to the CDC. As it's impervious to most major antifungal medications. First described in 2009 after a 70-year-old Japanese woman showed up at a Tokyo hospital with C. auris, Candida auris, in her ear canal. The aggressive yeast infection spread across Europe and Asia, arriving in the US by 2016. The earliest known case in the United States involved a woman who arrived at a New York hospital on May 6, 2013, seeking care for a respiratory failure. She was 61 years old, from the United Arab Emirates, and she died a week later after testing positive for the fungus. At the time, the hospital had not thought much of it, but 3 years later, it sent the case to the CDC after reading the agency's June 2016 advisory. Candida auris by state? Well, in most cases in the United States, have been in nursing homes in New York City, Chicago, and New Jersey. Quote, it's a creature from the Black Lagoon, end quote. This is what the CDC's Dr. Tom Schiller, who heads a fungal branch, says. It bubbled up and now it is everywhere. In the last 5 years alone, it has swept through the hospitals in Spain, a hospital in Spain, hit a neonatal unit in Venezuela, spread throughout India, Pakistan, South Africa, and forced a prestigious British medical center to close its ICU for nearly 2 weeks. By the end of June 2016, the scientific paper reported an ongoing outbreak of 50 C. auris cases at Royal Brompton, and the hospital took an extraordinary step. It shut down its ICU for 11 days, moving intensive care patients to another floor, again with no announcement. Days later, the hospital finally acknowledged a newspaper that had a problem. A headline in the Daily Telegraph warned, intensive care unit closed after deadly new superbug emerges in the UK. Later research said there were eventually 72 total cases, though some patients were only carriers and were not infected by the fungus. After Candida auris reached New York and New Jersey and Illinois, the CDC added that it to a list of germs deemed urgent threats. And we see it all over North America, in Venezuela, in Britain, Spain, France, Germany, all of Russia, all of China, India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Kenya, South Africa, and all of Australia and Singapore. Last May, an elderly man who was admitted to the Brooklyn branch of Mount Sinai Hospital for abdominal surgery was found to be infected with the drug-resistant Candida. He died after 90 days in the hospital. However, Candida auris did not, according to the Times. According to tests, the germ was everywhere in his room, to such a degree that the hospital required special cleaning equipment, had to rip out ceiling and floor tiles to get rid of it. Quote, everything was positive: the walls, the bed, the doors, the curtains, the phones, the sink, the whiteboard, the poles, the pump. This is what the hospital president, Dr. Scott Lawrence, said. The mattresses, the bed rails, the canister holes, the window shades, the ceiling, everything in the room was positive. Can you imagine if they didn't know that they had this and that you moved other patients in there? They would be totally infected, and even people visiting them. Now, why is this happening? Simply put, fungi are evolving defenses to resist and survive modern medications. Quote, it's an enormous problem, end quote. This is what Imperial College of London fungal epidemiology professor Matthew Fisher says. He's co-authored a recent scientific review on the rise of the resistant fungi. He says we depend on being able to treat those patients with antifungals. The CDC investigator theorized that Candida auris started in Asia and spread across the globe. But when the agency compared the entire genome of auris samples from India and Pakistan, Venezuela, South Africa, and Japan, it found that its origin was not a single place. and there was not a single auris strain. The genome sequence showed that there were 4 distinctive versions of this fungus, with differences so profound that they suggested that these strains had diverged thousands of years ago and emerged as resistant pathogens from harmless environmental strains in 4 different places at the same time. 4 at the same time. Wow. So, CDC fungal expert Dr. Shinga Valabeneni says somehow it made a jump, almost seemingly simultaneously, and seemed to spread, and it is drug resistant, which is really mind-boggling. While various theories exist as to why Candida auris has made a grand entrance, Dutch microbiologist Jack Mays believes the drug-resistant fungi are developing thanks to the heavy use of fungicides on crops. Dr. Mays visited the CDC last summer to share research and theorized that the same thing is happening with Candida auris, which is also found in the soil. Azoles have created an environment so hostile that the fungi are evolving, with resistant strains surviving. This is similar to concerns that resistant bacteria are growing because of excessive use of antibiotics in livestock for health and growth promotion. As with antibiotics in farm animals, azoles are used, azoles, I don't know how we pronounce that, A-Z-O-L-E-S, are used widely in crops. On everything. They're used on everything. Potatoes, beans, wheat, anything you can think of. Tomatoes, onions, said Dr. Joanna Rhodes, an infectious disease expert at Imperial College London. She said, we're driving this with the use of anti-fungicides on crops. And keeping it quiet, in 2015, Dr. Rhodes received a panicked call from the Royal Brompton Hospital Medical Research Centre outside of London, where Candida auris had taken root months earlier, and the hospital had no idea how to get rid of it. She says, we have no idea where it comes from. We've never heard of it. It just spread like wildfire, Rhodes was told before she helped them clean it up. Under her direction, hospital workers used a special aerosol device to spray hydrogen peroxide around the room, which housed a patient with a germ, with the theory being that the vapor would permeate in the entire room. After 1 week of saturating the room, they put a settled plate in the middle of it with a gel at the bottom that would allow any remaining microbes to grow. Only one grew back, Candida auris, and officials were scrambling to keep a lid on it. It was spreading, but word of it was not. The hospital, a specialty lung and heart center that draws wealthy patients from the Middle East and around Europe, alerted the British government and told infected patients but made no public announcement. Quote, there was no need to put out a news release during the outbreak, unquote, said Oliver Wilkinson, a spokesman for the hospital. This hushed panic is playing out in hospitals all around the world. Individual situations, institutions, national, state, and local governments have been reluctant to publicize outbreaks of resistant infections, arguing there is no point in scaring patients or prospective patients, according to New York Times. And while the Brompton Hospital case did make headlines, the issue remained largely out of the spotlight internationally, despite an even larger outbreak in Valencia, Spain, occurring at virtually the same time at the 992-bed hospital Universitari y Politecna La Fe, unknown to the public or unaffected patients. 372 people had become colonized with the germ, meaning it was on their bodies, but they had not yet contracted it. Of those, 85 patients developed bloodstream infections, and 41 of those died in 30 days. And while other prominent strains of Candida have not developed significant resistance to drugs, over 90% of Candida auris infections are resistant to at least one drug, while 30% are resistant to 2 or more drugs. And according to Connecticut's Deputy State Epidemiologist Dr. Lynn Sosa, Candida auris is now the top threat among resident infections. She said it's pretty much unbeatable and difficult to identify. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.